Gregory leaned close and whispered in my ear. If your father were here now, Alexei, he would have kindled a different sort of fire. He was a kind man, and so full of life. Do you remember him? No. No? Well, once he and grandmother... Wait a minute. He stood up so tall and at the same time so thin that he looked like one of those saints in the icons. He bowed to grandmother and asked her in an unusually deep voice, Akulina Ivanova, would you be good enough to dance for us like you used to with Maxim, please? Grandmother laughed and shrank away. Go on with you, Gregory. At my time of life, I'd be a laughingstock. But everyone started persuading her, and suddenly she sprang up like a young girl, straightened her skirt, held herself erect, tossed her head back and forth, and walked around the kitchen shouting, Laugh if you want to, it's good for you. Yasha, let's have some music. My uncle braced himself, closed his eyes, and played something a little slower. Siganuk stopped for a moment, leapt over to where grandmother was, squatted, and started dancing round her, while she sailed over the floor without a sound, as if she were flying, her hands flung outwards, eyebrows raised, and her black eyes peering into the distance. She struck me as very funny, and I burst out laughing. Gregory pointed a sternly threatening finger at me, and all the grown-ups looked at me disapprovingly. Give her room, Ivan, laughed Gregory. Siganuk obediently jumped to one side and sat by the door. Yevgenia, her Adam's apple popping up and down, began to sing in a deep, pleasant voice. All week long until Saturday, a maiden wove her lace. The work tired her out. Now there's hardly any life in her. That's the song. Grandmother seemed to be telling a story rather than dancing. She moved quietly, deep in thought, swaying and looking out from under her arms, her whole enormous body hesitating as her feet carefully felt their way. Suddenly, as though startled by something, she stopped. Her face trembled, became clouded over, and then, just as suddenly, was lit up by a friendly, welcoming smile. She tottered as though she were letting someone pass, and at the same time waving someone aside. She let her head drop, stood quite still, and seemed to be listening to something. Her smile grew gayer and gayer, and suddenly she whirled round impetuously, looking more graceful and taller than I had ever seen her before. It was impossible to take one's eyes off her. So wildly beautiful and enchanting had she become in those brief minutes when she had miraculously recovered her youth. And our nurse, Yevgenia, kept up her deep trumpeting. On Sunday, from early Mass to midnight, she danced. She was last to leave the street, and then it was Monday. It's another song. When she had finished dancing, grandmother went to her seat by the samovar. Everyone applauded, and she said, setting her hair in place, That's enough. Haven't you seen a real dancer before? When we lived in Bologna, there was a young girl, I forget her name now, who made people cry with joy when she danced. It really did you good just to look at her, and I was jealous of her. Singers and dancers are the salt of the earth, Yevgenia said seriously, and began a song about King David. Uncle Yakov embraced Siganuk and said, You should dance in the pubs. You'd be a roaring success. But I want to be a singer, complained Siganuk. If God gave me a voice, I'd sing for 10 years, and then go into a monastery. Everyone was drinking vodka, especially Grigory. Grandmother poured out glass after glass for him and warned, With all that drink, you'll go blind altogether. Not dismayed, he answered, What do I care? I don't need eyes anymore. I've seen everything. The drink had little effect on him, except that it made him more and more talkative, and then he nearly always started telling me about my father. He had a big heart, my old friend Maxim. Grandmother agreed with a sigh. Yes, God's own child. These facts about my father were all terribly interesting and kept me in a continuous state of excitement. They brought on a mild sadness that could never be exhausted. Sadness and joy lived side by side in people, almost inseparably, and one was always giving way to the other with a terrifying, mysterious speed. Once when he wasn't as drunk as usual, Uncle Yakov began ripping the shirt he was wearing to pieces. furiously tugging at his hair, his thin mustache, his nose, and protruding lip. "What's the good of it?" he howled, tears pouring down his cheeks. "What's it all for?" He struck himself across the cheek, forehead, and chest, and sobbed, "I'm a lazy, good-for-nothing, lost soul." Gregory snarled, "At last you've spoken the truth." Grandmother, also under the vodka's influence, caught hold of her son by the hands and urged him, "Enough of that kind of talk, Yasha. The Lord knows best." When she was drunk, she seemed all the finer for it. Her smiling, dark eyes spread out a heartwarming light on everybody, and as she fanned her flushed face with a handkerchief, she said in a sing-song voice, "Lord, how good everything is. Why can't you see that? You only have to look around you." This was spoken straight from the heart, and was her motto throughout life. I was very shocked by my uncle's tears and shouting, as he normally took things as they came. I asked grandmother why he cried and swore and hit himself all over. "You want to know everything," she said, with a reluctance that was unusual for her. "It's too early for you to be poking your nose into these things." This aroused my curiosity all the more. I went to the workshop and started questioning Ivan, but I got nothing out of him. All he did was laugh softly and looking at Gregory out of the corner of his eye. Then he started shouting and pushing me out of the room. "Clear off and don't come back, or I'll dip you in that vat and dye you a different color." Gregory, who was standing in front of a low, wide stove with three vats cemented onto it, was stirring the colors with a long black stick, and every now and then took it out to inspect the colors, dripping off the end. The fire burnt fiercely, and its light was reflected on his leather apron, as brightly colored as a priest's vestment. Colored water hissed in the vats, sending off billowing clouds of acrid steam almost as far as the door. A dry wind blew outside in the courtyard. Grigory looked at me from under his glasses with his turbid, bloodshot eyes, and said to Ivan gruffly, "Get some wood. Can't you see we're running short?" When Siganuk ran out into the yard, Grigory sat down on a bag of sandalwood, beckoned me over to him, and said, "Come and sit here." He put me on his knees, brushed his warm, soft beard against my cheek, and said in a way I shall never forget, "Your uncle beat and tortured his wife to death, and now his conscience is troubling him. Understand? You must try and understand everything, or else you won't get very far in this world." Grigory spoke simply, like grandmother, but at the same time he made me feel ill at ease, and he seemed to look right through everything from under his glasses. "And how did he beat her to death?" I asked, slowly. "Like this. He'd lie down in bed with her, cover her with a blanket from head downwards, and start pummeling her. Why? He doesn't even know himself." Taking no notice of Ivan, who'd come back with an armful of firewood, he squatted in front of the fire to warm his hands and continued. "He may have beaten her because she was better than him, and he was jealous. The Kasharins, my boy, don't like anything that's good. They get envious and they can't stand it, and destroy it in the end. Just ask your grandmother how they wore your father to death. She'll tell you everything as it happened. She can't bear falsehood, and doesn't understand why people lie. She's a saint, even if she does have a drop now and again and pinch her snuff. An angel of a woman. Mind you, stick to her." He pushed me away, and I went into the yard, feeling dejected and frightened. Just as I was going into the house, Vanushka caught me up, seized me by the head, and whispered, "Don't be afraid of him. He's all right. Look him straight in the eyes. He likes that." Everything was strange and very disturbing. I knew no other life, but had a dim recollection of my mother and father leading a different sort of existence. They spoke a different language, didn't enjoy themselves as we did, and were always close together, side by side. In the evenings they used to sit by the window, singing at the tops of their voices, and laughing loud and long, so that people in the street would gather and look up. Their upturned faces absurdly reminded me of unwashed dishes after dinner. But with these people there wasn't much laughter, and when they did laugh, I didn't always understand what they were laughing at. Often they would threaten or shout at each other and whisper secretly in corners. The children were quiet and inconspicuous, and seemed to be plastered to the ground. like dust after a rainstorm. I felt a stranger in the house, and my whole life there pricked me into being wide awake, suspicious, and very watchful of everything that went on. My friendship with Ivan grew stronger and stronger. From sunrise until late at night, grandmother was busy with the housework, and I had the whole day to follow Siganook around. When grandfather flogged me, he still put his arm in the way of the birch twigs, and the next day would show me his swollen fingers and complain, "I must be mad. It doesn't help, and look what I get as a result. I'm not going to do it anymore, so to hell with you." And with the next flogging, he would again suffer unnecessarily. "But you said you wouldn't do it anymore." "That's right, but I put my hand there. I didn't even notice what I was doing." I soon discovered something about Siganook which made my interest in him all the greater and deepened my love. Each Friday, Siganook would harness to the wide sledge Sherrup, our bay gelding, grandmother's favorite, a cunning rogue with a pronounced sweet tooth. Siganook dressed himself in a short fur coat which only reached his knees and a heavy-looking hat, and when he pulled his green belt tight, he would drive off to the bazaar for the groceries. Sometimes he was a long time getting back. Everyone became worried and would keep walking up to the windows to look up the street, their breath melting the ice on the panes. "Can you see him?" "No." Grandmother used to worry more than anyone else. "Oh God," she would say to her sons and to grandfather, "you'll be the ruination of a good man and a horse. You should be ashamed of yourselves. Have you no sense of decency? Or not enough money for yourselves? A lot of grasping thieves. God will punish you one day." Grandfather would frown and mumble, "All right then, this is the last time." Sometimes Siganook didn't return until midday. The uncles and grandfather would rush outside, and behind them, furiously taking pinches of snuff and moving like a great she-bear, followed grandmother. For some reason at this time of the day she seemed very clumsy. Outran the children, and then, amid rapturous scenes, sucking pigs, whole birds, fish, and pieces of meat of every kind would be unloaded from the sledge. "Did you buy everything you were told to?" asked grandfather, gauging the contents of the sledge out of the corner of his sharp eyes. "Everything you asked for," Ivan replied gaily, leaping across the yard and loudly clapping his gloves together to warm himself. "Don't bang your gloves like that. They cost money," grandfather shouted sternly. "Any change?" "No." Grandfather slowly walked around the sledge, muttering, "Looks like you've brought a lot of stuff back. Sure you paid for it all? I won't have any dishonesty in this house." And he hurried away, his face wrinkled up. The uncles joyfully leaned on the sledge and started weighing in their hands the birds, the fish, the goose giblets, the legs of veal, and other huge chunks of meat. They would whistle and shout approvingly, "He's bought very well." Uncle Mikhail was more enraptured on these occasions than anyone else. Like a coiled spring, he would jump around the sledge, sniffing at everything with his woodpecker beak, smacking his lips with relish, blissfully screwing up his restless eyes. He was thin like his father, but taller and darker. Hiding his frozen hands in his sleeves, he started cross-examining Siganook. "How much did father give you?" 5 kopecks. "But there's about 15 kopecks worth of food here. How much did you spend?" "About 4.5. "Then you should have a half left. Notice how it all adds up?" Uncle Yakov, standing in the freezing cold with just his shirt on, quietly laughed, and winked at the cold blue sky. "How about standing us half a bottle of vodka each, Ivan?" he said lazily. Grandmother unharnessed her horse. "What is it then? Feel like a bit of fun?" "Go on then, God won't mind." The huge sheriff would shake his thick mane, scratch at her shoulder with his white teeth, pluck the silk kerchief from her hair, look right into her face with smiling eyes, gently neighing as he shook the frost from his eyelashes. "Would you like a piece of bread?" She stuffed a large, well-salted crust between his teeth, and held her apron out like a sack under his mouth, thoughtfully watching him as he ate.